the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And we are live, active, talking, and vibing. Right, Taylor?
Man, yeah, I'm trying my best. It's early. And we daylight saved, so it's very early. But I'm fine.
Hold on, what? Wait, it was daylight savings?
Yeah, but like you don't even notice because all of your stuff happens automatically. Like maybe check your oven. But like other than that, it just
Wait, so
happens.
is it supposed to be like noon my time right now?
Yes. No. 11. We went up an hour. 10.
It is 11 my time.
Supposed to be 10. So
Oh,
my
weird.
my phone says 9:19, but my like wall clock says 8:19.
Oh, I didn't even realize it.
I know you don't notice unless you have a wall clock or check your oven.
Yesterday was also just kind of wild. So,
Yeah.
glad it's finally chill. But anyways, welcome to Doom to Fail. I'm Farge, joined here by Taylor. We're going to be bringing you two topics. Wait, no, we're going to bring you one topic twice a week
Yeah.
about things that are doomed to fail. I'm pretty sure I go first this time, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I have a pretty fun one, I think, for you today. I think.
Can't wait. Show
Okay.
show me.
Should I, should we do the guessing game?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I am going to talk about the most famous Ugandan person in world history. Do we know who that is?
Oh my God, no. I wish I did. I don't.
You'll recognize his name. It is Idi Amin.
Ooh, okay. This is
Yep.
the big one.
Yep. Uh, there was I think, an Academy Award-winning movie based on this guy. It was called The Last King of Scotland. Forrest Whitaker
That's ex
played Idi Amin.
that's exactly what I was thinking. But I didn't know the name. But yes.
And for those who saw the movie, so what they depicted in that movie is like mostly accurate. What's not accurate is that guy never existed. The guy, the Scottish guy who was his physician, that wasn't a real person. Like he actually had a real physician. It was a Ugandan, born and raised Ugandan. Like that was his personal physician, but it wasn't it wasn't like a white savior thing, really.
Fair.
So, I'm gonna start this in like several levels. So the first level is, as I started my research on this, I realized that it is almost impossible for us to fathom what the political life in Uganda has been like throughout its like mostly
Mm-hmm.
post-colonial history. I started
Mm-hmm.
researching this by going back through the historical record and realized that it was like really, really complicated. There were like a ton of tribes and factions and interests, and all of it was weirdly intertwined with other countries that were dealing with similar issues themselves. And so it just got like really, really complicated. I realized that if I went down this path of trying to figure out how a guy like Idi Amin came to power completely, then this would turn into like a Dan Carlin level
Yeah, I
podcast.
mean you could write a book, I feel like. So
Dude, it is
yes.
so complicated. It was so like I have like so many different notes of like this tribe was aligned with this political party
Mm-hmm.
and like this ethnic group. It's weird. It did have you seen Hotel Rwanda?
No.
Do you remember, you know, the Rwandan genocide, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it was like largely based on the fact that like Rwanda, for example, was like a Belgian colony, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
and they identified the lighter skinned black people as being like the ones who deserve privilege, and the darker skinned ones,
Jesus
the
fucking
ones that
Christ.
didn't. It was like the Hutus and the Tutsis. I forgot which one was which, but what happened was like once Belgium left the country, the darker ones were gonna take like their revenge on the lighter ones, and that's where
Uh-huh.
the genocide started. Like it's weird. It's like weird racial like interplayed
It
racial stuff.
always is. That sucks. Yeah,
Yeah.
that sucks.
Well, so pivoting back to Uganda, I went as far back as when it was a British territory and what happened when it stopped being a British territory, because that seems to be like the genesis of like all the chaos that happened with the rise of
Hmm.
Idi Amin. So basically, Uganda was a British territory and it was part of the Commonwealth from 1894 until 1962. From then, 1962 until 1966, there was kind of a peace. Like there was the establishment of a government within Uganda.
Hmm.
And this is something that I don't even understand. So there's a kingdom within Uganda called
Hmm.
Bugunda,
Hmm.
and it's within the territorial borders of the country itself, but it has complete autonomy on its own. Like it
Hmm.
just operates on its own. And so when the Brits were there, they were like, just leave these people alone, do your own thing. Like, yes, you are within our boundaries, but you can just do whatever you want. And when they left and Uganda established its own government, they also similarly were like, just leave these people mostly alone. It's going to be fine. It was a problem for the government of Uganda to figure this out because that kingdom, Bagunda, it represents 14% of the population within the borders of Uganda itself, which doesn't
Hmm.
sound like it's that huge, but it is huge if you factor in that it is a single tribe. So all
Right.
these other factions within Uganda are like various different tribes, and so they don't have a population density, and they're always fighting with each other. Whereas
Hmm.
Bagunda is just like one giant conglomerate of people that all are aligned behind the same ethnic background and religious background. So
Okay.
in 1966, tensions started rising between the government and the kingdom to the point where Uganda actually attacked the kingdom and tried to take over their palace. That led to what I would argue is the downfall of basic democracy within Uganda that ultimately gave rise to a guy like Idi Amin. At that time, Uganda had a prime minister, a guy named Apollo Milton Obuto, and he was the one who basically was like attack the kingdom, take over the palace, and let's just get rid of this whole separate autonomous kingdom within the territorial boundaries of Uganda. So, as part of that, he essentially did away with several government cabinet positions that were a part of his government and suspended the constitution of Uganda to basically say, like, hey, I'm just going to go rogue and try to figure out what to do with this kingdom. So that's what he essentially did. And he took over this kingdom and abolished it and established complete control over the entire country. Again, this was the guy named Milton Obuti.
Hmm.
The people of Uganda really had issues with this guy Obuti. He was essentially the first prime minister, first ruler, governor of Uganda. And I'm going to try and parse exactly what this guy did that pissed people off. But again, it's so nuanced, it's so textured and detailed.
Hmm.
Rough strokes was that Ubuti was trying to present the optics of nationalism as though, hey, we're all, Ugandans, like forget about the tribal stuff. But he did it under the guise of socialism in a way that was not well received.
Hmm.
So he would often talk about how a strong democracy was imperative and the will of the majority was imperative for the Ugandan people and the government itself. But at the same time, he also mandated the government take control of the largest corporations in the country. What was problematic with that was that, again, when the Brits left like 4 years ago, like everything there was like largely British oriented. Like Barclays, for example, was a prominent bank at the time, all that stuff. When Abuti came into power, he said that any foreign corporations that are operating in Uganda had to reincorporate as a Ugandan company to operate there. So what that means is that now the government of Uganda was able to take over corporations that were owned by other countries or
Hmm.
operated outside of those boundaries. Like Barclays was a really good example they referenced a few times. That was the primary bank of Uganda, but now they're like, we're not going to deal with this shit. Like, no, you can't own our company. Like, what are you talking about?
Hmm.
And so all that essentially spiraled into corruption, food shortages, crazy inflation, everything that comes along with it.
Hmm.
So this is what led to the civil unrest within Uganda under this guy's government. And eventually, on January 25th, 1971, Idi Amin, who was a general that was working for Abuti, he decided that he was going to lead a coup using the military to remove him from power, and he was going to take control of the government.
Hmm.
By all accounts, there was a rift between them. Amin was actually the general who led the attack on the palace in the kingdom to take over and abolish the kingdom within Uganda. So he was very, very high up and very tied into things that were going on there. So that's what ends up happening in 1971 is Amin uh, establishes this coup, and it was relatively bloodless, mostly because Obuti was attending a conference or a summit in Singapore. So during the time, Amin, who had complete control of the police and military, just basically told them to take the capital and shut down the airport so that this guy can't come back to his
Hmm.
home country. So that's
Hmm.
basically it. Like it wasn't like a bloody like when you hear about like the civil unrest. Usually, it's usually pretty out there, but that wasn't the case here. I mean, there was still murders, but they were murders of opportunity, which was like, hey, we're going to take over the palace. And someone's like, you can't do it. I'm going to stand up for my president. And it was like, nah, we'll just tell this guy to get over with. So it was
I feel like
relatively bloodless,
I've heard that before where like you do it when if you do it when someone's out of town. It's you
which is
know.
like hilarious.
Yeah.
Like it's like when your parents go out of town and you invite your friends over.
Hmm.
So Amin ran Uganda as a military dictatorship. His official and formal title during his rule was, it's going to take a little bit, okay?
Okay.
This is his title. His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Al Hajj, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, CBE, Lord of all the beasts on the earth and fishes of the sea, and conqueror of the British Empire and Africa in general, and Uganda in particular.
That's very long.
He was obviously a crazy person. I did a lot of digging because I was like, everybody has at least like one redeeming quality.
Uh-huh. He
Like
doesn't.
almost everybody has one, and I could not find a single quality that this guy had that was actually redeemable. So that was his formal title. Unofficially, his nicknames were Butcher of Uganda, Butcher of
Mm.
Africa, the
Hmm.
Machete, and my personal favorite, Black Hitler.
Oh my God. I'm excited that we're talking about this because I've definitely want to learn more because I know now there's plenty of very, very bad things happening in Africa that are not in the mainstream news. So it's good to get a little bit
Yeah,
of a background.
and I will talk about that if you want to talk about that because nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Like almost nothing has changed. And then will there's a topic I'll bring up at the very end of this just to highlight that point. So going back to Amin, his only real experience in life was that of running military operations. He literally had no experience on how to handle the economy, humanitarian efforts, diplomacy, functionally, basically nothing civil government related he had any experience in. You add to the fact that he was also completely beholden to the army. Like he was their figurehead, and he's the reason why he
Hmm.
was able to take power. Add to that the fact that he had crashed the economy into the wall so hard that he was struggling to compensate them and keep them happy so they don't try and overrule him. He was naturally very, very incredibly paranoid and violent.
Hmm.
And by the way, he also happened to be illiterate. So add to that the fact that every directive that he issued had to be done over like a speech or over the phone with a violent temperament, and you have nothing in writing. So if he calls you and you're his minister of something and he just says, yeah, I just think we should do this thing, and you do that thing, like you have no written record of him saying that. He would just come back to you and say, what? I didn't say that. And then just kill you. Like it was a
Yeah.
nightmare.
Oh my God.
So what you essentially end up with that combination is a country that was in complete upheaval. The sense I got from reading about him and his government is that the patients were basically running the asylum.
Hmm.
He had the love and respect of his military, but he also knew that that was only going to last for as long as he was able to control them and as long as they saw him as like strong and not
Hmm.
weak, essentially.
Hmm.
I view some of the things that he did as the flailings of a leader who is too incompetent to know where his struggles are, and he's just
Hmm.
like trying to figure out what to do. So, as an example of that, I highlighted a few things that he did during his rule. The first being the purging the government and military, all of the former Prime Minister Abuti's supporters, and also like again, it gets to weird racial stuff, like just like tribal minorities that he didn't like or thought that would be more aligned with somebody else than him. roughly 300,000 people fit this bill of people who just were like kind of undesirables that he had executed primarily using machetes, which is why he
Oh my
got
God.
the nickname Machete. And most of those bodies they would just end up dumping in the River Nile. So 300,000, some estimates say 500,000, whatever. It's a lot of people to kill,
Yeah.
basically. Uganda was and is a predominantly Christian country. I think the latest stat that I found was that 40% of the country identifies as Christian. And it was
Hmm.
kind of the same back then as well, which posed a problem for Amin because a lot of people listen to their spiritual leaders. And most of the time, despite what we both probably think and assume is true, spiritual leaders aren't crazy sociopaths who want to use machetes on people. Like
Hmm.
they're like somewhat better than that. And that was a problem for me because he was like, my populace is going to listen to these leaders and they're going to possibly turn them against me. And so he made a
Hmm.
point to go out killing bishops, pastors, priests, you name it.
Oh
Basically,
my God.
anybody who was kind of in a position of power against him. Since
Yikes.
the since the economy
I mean,
was in the tank, he implemented like a brilliant idea. This was so smart, and it was totally repeatable policy because he was trying to figure out how to increase like the coffers of the government. And so this was great, brilliant idea. So about 80,000 or so people who are the population of Uganda, uh, they're Indians. They come from India because
hmm
again, this was a British colony. We know the story of Mahatma Gandhi. A lot of folks were brought over as indentured servants, and then once they
hmm
left, they were released and all that stuff. What Amin did was, again, looking at the minority aspect of his rule, he decided that the way that he was going to bolster the coffers of the government was give these people, about 60,000 of them who have dual passports, 60,000 of them 90 days to evacuate the country or face death or
Oh my
prison
God.
camps. The point being that he could then take their properties and repatriate them to the Ugandan government.
Hmm.
There was a fact I read that I almost don't believe, and I can't really get too much further into it. I tried digging this up more. The Economist reported in an article they wrote on August 18th of 2022. It was called 50 Years On from the Arrival of the Ugandan Asians. They're calling them Asians because India is on the Asian continent, but that's what they mean by that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't understand this. What they said was that this 60,000 population of Indians was somehow responsible for 90% of tax revenues received by the government.
Hmm.
I don't understand it because
Why would
for
that be?
context,
Yeah.
because in 1974, the entire population of Uganda was 11.4 million, which means that 0.005% of the population was responsible for 90% of tax revenue. I don't
Hmm.
get how that's even possible.
I mean, were they just ta the only ones who were taxed?
How do you run a country though?
I mean, I don't know.
How do you fix roads? Like, how do you? I guess you don't. I guess that's how you end up in this situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy paying taxes because I have nice roads and a great school, you know.
I mean, yeah. Again, we'll get to this. We'll
Yeah.
talk about this here in a little bit because
Hmm.
I looked up visiting Uganda now, and I got a story to tell about that too. So, some other fun facts about Amin and his role. So in 1976, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation, or what is it? O? I forget what the O is. Whatever, it's Palestinians. They hijacked a commercial plane going from Tel Aviv to Paris to compel the release of various Palestinians who were imprisoned in Israel. Amin, again, showing his incredible aptitude at statecraft, he allowed the plane to land in Uganda, kind of show himself as like a world leader that he was going to help negotiate the release and do whatever. Like
Hmm.
he was way out of his depth. Like Israel, who, as we know historically, has given absolutely zero fucks about solving their problems on their own,
Hmm.
They ended up working with Kenya to cross into their airspace into Uganda. The Israeli forces were planning on just, we're not doing diplomacy. We don't care what Amin says. We don't give a shit what the Ugandan armed forces want. We're gonna handle this ourselves, which is like really badass. Like, I actually like really love reading this story. It was really really cool. So the Israeli forces decided about a week after planning this that they were gonna land at the airbase where the hostages were being kept. At that point, the hostages had been moved from the plane on into the terminal. So they get there, and they had also brought with them the exact same car, color, and model that Amin had.
Hmm.
Because, like, again, nobody is driving like a brand new S class. Like,
Right.
you see an S class in Uganda, you're like, that's Amin. Like, there's literally nobody else. There's only one in the country. You're gonna say something.
I do have a question. So the hostages, are they just regular folks happen to be on the plane, or are they like political people?
No, they're just regular people. Yeah,
Okay,
they're flying from Tel Aviv to Paris for trips, vacations, business, stuff like that.
cool.
So they bring the same car that Amin has just to fool the Ugandan security forces. Basically, they knew, what I read about this was that they knew they were going to have to get into a firefight with the Ugandan armed forces. They were basically going to start like a mini war, but they're
Hmm.
like, we're going to try and get as far into the airport as before the gunfire starts. Uh, they end up making it to the terminal after having killed one of the Ugandan security forces. And once they get to the terminal, they basically go fully guns blazing. Ultimately, they grab the hostages, they get them onto the Israeli plane to head back there. In all, seven of the hijackers were killed, 45 or so Ugandan soldiers were killed, and three of the hostages were killed. In the middle of all this, Israel also destroyed 11 Ugandan MiG fighter jets that were at the air base that they would have a better chance of making it back across borders. And they did. So,
Wow.
yeah, my take on this, like, dude, that is badass. Like, that is so, like, good on you, Israel, for going in and doing that. Because, like, yeah, why would you trust this guy to negotiate on your behalf? Like, I
Yeah,
definitely wouldn't.
that's fair.
So, in response to this, Amin was really, really pissed because he was trying to show himself as like a negotiator and like a leader and all that.
And like
And
part of the
Israel was
world
killing him.
stage, I imagine.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it adds to that the fact that Israel killed a bunch of Ugandan soldiers, destroyed a bunch of Ugandan military equipment, and all that stuff. In total, Amin shot and killed 12 of his own soldiers who were there, and he said, let the raid happen. Um, between the time that the hostage takeover happened and the raid happened, there's one woman who was 74 years old, and she fell ill, and they negotiated with the hijackers to release her to a Ugandan hospital to get aid.
Hmm.
So there was one hostage who wasn't at the terminal when the raid took place. She was at the hospital. Amin ended up going to the hospital and having her killed out of anger towards Israel, and killing a bunch of her doctors and nurses who were trying to get in the way of his security forces not killing this poor 74-year-old hostage.
Oh my God, just because he was mad. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, not,
Yeah.
oh, it's terrible.
Add to that he also killed about 245 Kenyans who were living in Uganda due to the fact that Uganda allowed Israel to cross into their airspace. Like, they negotiated with Israel, and that pissed him off as well. So,
Hmm.
again, like, no redeeming qualities, total sociopath, like awful, awful, awful human being.
Hmm.
Um, Another fun fact about him, he is like kind of single-handedly responsible for the population decline of elephants, rhinos, crocodiles, and lions within Uganda because he allowed his forces, because he was having a hard time keeping with how to pay them and keep them happy, he was like, go poach them. So, by all accounts, the population of elephants in Uganda declined 75%,
Oh my
rhinos
God.
98%, 80% for crocodiles, and 80% for lions, just because he would let his soldiers go and kill and poach these things. It's
Oh my
crazy.
God.
So eventually, his control over his military grew very, very tenuous, and some members of his military decided to flee across the border to Tanzania. And in the process, Ugandan forces followed them and engaged them in Tanzania, which again is a sovereign country bordering Uganda. Not great.
Hmm.
So really, at the time, what was happening was he had lost control of his military, and they were kind of acting on their own volition. Like, I mean, can you imagine? Like, some soldiers in Texas just like going into Mexico and starting a firefight. Like, it would be, like you're
A little bit.
starting a war with a
Yeah.
well, sort of, yeah. But still, you're starting a war
Yeah.
with another country. It's like a crazy level of like disregard for your leadership.
Hmm.
Um, what Amin did, and this was mostly assumed that he did this to save face, was that he decided after he found out this happened, he decided to declare war on Tanzania. He had no reason to declare war on Tanzania, but he was like, "Oh shit, my military's acting rogue. They're starting a firefight in another country. I better just say this." And it was done to save face and pretend like he still had military under control. So, uh, the president of Tanzania, much to his credit, was like, "Great, you got a deal." He begins
Hmm.
assembling his forces on the border for full-on invasion of Uganda. Amin realizes, oh shit, this is like really bad for me, and he again defers back to his state craftsmanship and
Hmm.
decides that he's going to challenge the president of Tanzania to a boxing match. Whoever wins that conflict is wins it all. Basically, that was his
Oh my
idea.
God.
Obviously, the president of Tanzania did not reply to this and decided that he's just going to attack Uganda and go after the capital. The capital city is called Kampala. That's where Amin is. That's where the presidential palace was. And that's where the Tanzanian forces were now advancing because there was nobody in charge of the Ugandan military. Amin decides to flee at that time. So he initially flees to Libya because he was also very close to Muammar Gaddafi. And eventually he moves to Saudi Arabia, where the royal family basically offered him like a stipend and housing and safety and security in exchange for never going into politics again. By this time, about
That's
eight and a
that's very
half years.
Napoleon, a very Napoleon thing to do to be like, get out of here. You can't have a job anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this time we're looking about 8.5, 9 years from when he started to when we're at this stage of what's going on. Uh, this lasts for about 9 years, this exile, and then I can only assume he just grew restless because he um he he knew that Uganda was in turmoil in 1989, and so what he ended up doing was he had a following of supporters that were in Zaire. He decides that he's going to fly out of Saudi Arabia into Zaire to try and mobilize his supporters and figure out how to take back control in
Hmm.
1989. Um, he was immediately arrested upon landing in Zaire by the government because he was incredibly well known. I mean, he had the title the Butcher of Africa and Black Hitler. Like he wasn't going to just like go into another country and not be recognized.
I mean, I imagine he's still wearing his outfit.
Yeah, yeah. These people obviously they go to bed in their military uniform.
Yeah, it's a lot. I Googled it and there's a egregious number of medals.
He's a beast owner, master of fishes, and yeah,
Yeah.
you get a
Hmm.
lot of medals for that. So Zaire, the government contacts Saudi Arabia saying, "Hey, we don't want this guy here. We're going to send him back." The royal family said, "No, we're good. Do not send this guy to Saudi Arabia."
Hmm.
Eventually, they put him on a plane to Senegal, and literally upon arriving, the government of Senegal put him on a plane and flew him back to Zaire. So eventually, the king of Morocco calls and begs the royal family of Saudi Arabia to let him back in. And eventually, they relent and say, "Fine, we'll let you back in." On August 16th of 2003, he died of kidney failure in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, where he is now buried. But that was his life. That was basically what happened. He eventually had, I believe, 60 children
And
with
ask.
5 wives. And
That's
I think a couple of those are now like again, I would love if anybody's like a historian of like African countries, like let us like it is so complicated. Like you have to study this stuff for your entire life to even start to comprehend it. Because I read about his son, how his son is now aligned with another faction that was like originally aligned with the faction that his dad took over. Like it's
yeah.
crazy. Like
I do have I do I mean, obviously like this is barely, touching the surface just like of this story, but yeah, I'd love to know more. It's crazy. It's like just
well,
wild that all that I mean, it's wild that I don't I mean, it's not wild, but like when am I supposed to learn all of that? I wish I
I don't
would.
think you. I really don't think you can. I think you
I
have to like
know.
rely on people who are able to distill it for us. Like again, The Last King of Scotland's a really good portrayal of what it would have been like to live in Amin's country at that time. But I looked up Uganda today, and apparently you can actually still go there and visit the torture chambers where around 200,000 people were starved or beaten to death.
Oh.
The State Department, the United States State Department, has a level 3 travel advisory up for Uganda, which literally means quote unquote reconsider travel. Part of the
Hmm.
reason for that is that in this, man, you'll go down some deep rabbit holes with this. So, in the guy who's president now has essentially been president since shortly after Amin stopped being president.
Hmm.
He's one of those presidents where he passes like constitutional amendments saying that you'd never have to stop running for president. There's no term limit. He changed the age limit for president. Like he's one of those like he's very much in line with like in a mean type, which is really gross because there's pictures of him with like Obama shaking his hand and smiling. I'm like, what are we
That is
doing?
gross.
What are
Yeah.
we doing? So in 2014, his government was the one that passed the anti-homosexuality bill.
Oh God.
And when I researched it, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like they struck it down. The Supreme Court of Uganda struck this down, so there is some like checks and balances on this. So great. Um, when I went on the State Department's website and they put the reconsider traveling advisor on there, they specifically go back and refer to it's called the Anti-Homosexuality Act of 2023.
Hmm.
This just happened. Like it literally just happened a year ago, like less than a year ago. So they tried again to pass another bill that was similar to the one that I mentioned in 2014. This one did get through and has not been struck down. And essentially what this does is it institutes a mandatory life imprisonment for consensual homosexual behavior. And for anybody caught promoting anything considered homosexual. So think of like advocacy organizations that want to fight against a law like this. Like that's kind of what
Hmm.
that is. That is a 20-year prison sentence. And if you were caught having multiple of these acts against you, that's a death sentence.
Wow.
So one thing that came up researching this was that that mentality of like strength and military and machismo and all that Amin kind of exemplified and perpetuated during his rule, that's now baked in to the consciousness, which is how you
Right.
end up having laws like this written, is because like that's who's left. Everybody else was killed.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
No, totally. It's
so
very,
so
it's
yeah,
very scary.
apparently like it's not a safe place to visit
No.
and who knows if it ever will be, because it sounds like this guy's probably not going to go away for a while. When he does go away, it'll be another strong man that's going to come in and lead them, and yeah, we're kind of just in a perpetual cycle there.
That's awful. And in the meantime, people, I'm sure, are just not, they're living pretty rough lives.
I would assume so. Yeah, it's again like the history and the culture is so rich. I started looking into the Rwandan genocide. It all just seems like it's very, very tenuous piece,
Hmm.
punctuated by moments of like insane violence.
Yeah. I mean, killing that many people with machetes, I don't even know what that, I mean, I can't imagine what that entails.
Yeah,
You know, that's
yeah,
so violent and it's so personally violent. Like there's some things that I've read like about like other military history things where like like a bayonet, like a gun with like the knife on the front of it, like
yeah,
people very rarely actually stab someone with it, because once you get that close to someone, it's really hard,
yeah.
like it's harder than you imagine it will be. And when you get there, you're like, fuck, I'm in front of this person with this knife.
But I think it can only happen in this tribal kind of environment, because you can look at somebody and say the person that looks like you killed someone that looked like me or my
Yeah.
family. So I'm just doing an eye for an eye, and it. I mean, that's what kept coming up with this stuff was like the tribal element of it, of like,
Hmm.
and that's why I mentioned like that one kingdom was like everybody else was nobody was aligned. It was just this one function within
Hmm.
this kingdom that was aligned, or this one faction. But anyways, yeah. So, uh, re- please tell us if you know more about this stuff. There was another
Yeah,
one
I'd
that I
love to know
wanted
more.
to research, and I haven't gotten around to it, but I might do like Warlord series.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I mean, it's not something that I see on my usual like news day, you know?
Yeah, like we're too involved. Like again, like we talked about this before about like how we're so U.S. centric and U.S. focused, and we want the U.S. to be better or people to be better or whatever. And then you look at like what happens outside of our borders, and like we're so insulated from things
Hmm.
that everything here looks existential. And then you look outside and like, holy shit, like like it could be infinitely worse than this.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Can't
anyways, that's my
protect that.
story today, Taylor. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully the people listening enjoyed it. And again, if you know about this stuff, or even if you just have recommendations on where to go for content about this stuff,
Hmm.
I'd be so curious. Like, I'm sure there's other movies or better movies about this than The Last King of Scotland, but so yeah, so let us know if you have any. Again, our email is doomediflpod@gmail.com. We're on the socials at doomediflpod. So yeah, that's it.
I have something. Hold on. I'm sorry. I'm listening. I'm just going to my phone. Our friend Nadine, I'm so sorry. I'm just reading this comment that she sent me. She's from Canada and she was saying in Canada, public service this is in reference to your postal service story that the public service is unionized, but there's always like drama around what constitutes an essential service and whether they can or cannot go on strike. So they get a little bit creative of using other labor actions instead of a full-on strike to advocate. So just
Fun.
interesting that over there they have a little bit more I think ability to kind of fight for what their hope for a safe workplace and all of that.
Well, it's unionized here too. There's a postal workers union in the United States.
So they could go on strike,
They can now, but at the
but
time
they
in
couldn't before.
1970, yeah, 1970, they were a agency of the federal government. They were an
Hmm.
administrative office of the federal government.
Have they
Um,
gone on strike?
yeah, yeah, they were on strike. I think that was 8 days they were on strike, and that's when Nixon ended up saying, "Fine,
No,
you
no,
know
I mean, but
what?
since then.
Oh, I don't know that. I don't know.
Um, cool. I don't know. Interesting how other countries do it. Um, oh, the last one was 1972. You're right. You're right.
Oh, 72. Sorry, I said 70.
Whatever. Oh no, there's one in 70. The last one was in 72.
Okay, the 71 then is the one that established that
Yeah,
they can unionize and they can be a separate office than a federal agency. So,
right. Oh,
sweet. Well,
interesting.
Taylor,
Well,
thank
thanks.
you for that. We'll go ahead and cut this off and rejoin y'all on Wednesday. Thanks all.